This next video is call by reference functions. In this video, we're going to do a review on pass by value functions, and then we're going to talk about what a reference is, and then I'm just going to show you how you can actually use pass by reference parameters in conjunction with pass by value parameters in the same function. So let's just talk about let's just do a review on pass by value functions. Recall we did a pass by value function where we calculated the area of a circle. That particular function had a pass by value parameter, which means that we're only going to take the value of the variable and we're not going to actually do anything with the actual variable inside the function. So here's an example. Inside our main function, we have a variable named radius, and it's set to the value of 5. So let's just illustrate that a little bit. So we have radius here. It's going to be at memory address, let's just say 0001, and then it has a value of 5. All right, so this variable is created here, and it's within the scope of main, meaning that once we get to the end of main, then this variable would actually die. All right, and so now we're going to create a new variable called area, and we're going to set it equal to the return value of the area of a circle function. And we're actually going to pass the variable radius to that function. Now, when we actually go to the function, that area of a circle is not actually taking the variable radius. It's taking the value of radius. And what it's doing is it's actually now creating a new variable called radius inside the memory. And it's putting that at a new memory address. And then it's just taking the value of the old radius, the one that's in the scope of main. So now we actually have two variables named radius at two different memory addresses, and they actually have the same value. Then the area of the circle does its calculation using the newly created radius variable that it created specifically for that function. It's a local variable to that function. It does a calculation, and then after we reach the end of our scope, then this variable gets killed out of the memory, and then we go back to our main function. And if you can see, our original radius was never touched. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Let's take a look at an example using the swap function. Right? So if I had a swap function, and let's say we're going to swap two integers. So if I pass by value, I can say integer A, integer B, and then the algorithm is pretty simple. We create a temporary variable. We'll call it temp. We'll set it equal to A, and then we'll say A is equal to B, and then finally we'll say B is equal to temp. And that will swap the variables A and B. So now let's try to use that inside our main function. I'll create a new main function down here. So let's have a new main function here, int main. And inside int main, I'm going to create two variables, A, and I'm going to set A equal to 5. And I'm going to create another variable, B, and set that equal to 6. And then we'll call that swap function. So I'm going to say swap A and B. All right. So now let's take a look how pass by value would work. So first of all, let's create our memory. Right. I'll create it here. And I'm gonna add I'm gonna add a new column, right? This is gonna be the scope. So I'm gonna say the scope is main, right? The variable is going to be A. And the address is, let's just say it's 101, 1001. And then we'll say that the value is 5, right? Because that's how we declared it inside our main. Then we're going to go ahead and create another variable, which is B, right? That's in the scope of main. The variable name is B. And we'll say the address is 1002. And the value of B is 6. All right. So now we actually pass A and B to the swap function, but we're passing the value. It's passed by value. So now swap is going to also create new variables, right? So now we're in the scope of swap. And it's going to create a variable A, and it's going to put that at a new address. Let's just say that's 1003. It's going to take the value of the variable that was passed to it. So that means that it's going to create A and set it to the value of 5 as well. And then we're going to create another variable, swap. It's in the scope of swap. So we're going to have it called B, because that is what swap says the name of the variable is. And let's say that's at 1004, and that's going to take in the value of 6. All right, so now in our swap function, we also create a variable called temp. Let me see if I can squeeze that in a little bit. Temp, right? And this is scope. So we'll call this, the scope is swap. The variable name is temp. And let's just say that's now at 005. And right now, temp doesn't have a value. So inside our swap variable, let's look at the first instruction. The first instruction says that temp is equal to A. So temp is going to be equal to the value of A temp is going to be equal to the value of A. So the value of A here is, of course, 5. We're in the scope of swap, so we're going to look at A, and the value of A is 5. All right, next instruction says that A is equal to B. So I'm going to take a look at the value of B, and now I'm going to change A so that it's equal to B. So now A is equal to 6. Right? The next instruction here says that B is now equal to temp. And I'm not sure what happened with my stylus pen, but this was supposed to be a 5. So let me just fix that. All right, so now the last instruction said B is equal to temp. So now we're going to actually change B and make that equal to temp. So if you notice, the variables A and B within the scope of swap has actually been switched. It's now A is now equal to 6, B is now equal to 5. And then once we reach the end of the scope of swap, then all of our variables get killed. These get erased. But if you noticed, the variables in the scope of main did not get touched. And that's because we passed by value. Now, if we want to actually modify the variables that were actually in the scope of main, then we would need to pass by reference. And if we pass by reference, then then we're actually not dealing with the function creating new local variables, but the functions will actually reference the addresses that were passed to it in the function parameters. So let's actually just take a look at that with some code. So let me find my handy dandy code. All right, so in here I have written out the swap function. And so first let's go ahead and test this out without using the reference. All right, so I'm going to remove these references. And if you notice, the ampersand represents that the variable is a reference and not a value. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and run this function. Let me just actually explain the couple of functions I have. I have a swap function here that takes in two variables, and the ideal is that it will swap the values of those variables. I also have an output, and this is just a simple function that is going to output what the values of the variable is. If we look at the definition, it's simply just saying A equals, and then the value of A, and then B equals the value of B. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare two variables. I'm going to output the values of the variables. Then I'm going to perform the swap function. Then I'm going to output the variables after the swap. So let me go ahead and run this. If you notice, I have A is equal to 1 and B is equal to 0. So when I run my code, it shows that A is equal to 1 and B is equal to 0. Then we swap, and after the swap, A is still equal to 1 and B is still equal to 0. So now, if we change those to references, and that's simply by adding the ampersand before the variable name, then you'll see that the variables will now actually do what we intended them to do, and that's actually swap values. So let me go ahead and run this code now. Right, and so here we go. A is equal to 1, B is equal to 0. Then we do the swap. Now A is equal to 0 and B is equal to 1. And that's pretty much how pass by references work. All right, and I just wanted to make one simple note that you do not have to, if you have pass by parameter variables, you can mix them. And what I mean is, let's say we had a function, and I'll call it a void function, and my function. I can have variables int A that is not passed by reference, and I can have variables int B that is passed by reference. And I can do that as many times as I need to inside of my function. So we're not limited to one or the other. Thank you. And also, the secret word is Pudo.